So, I mean, imagine your entire life relies on physical movement. Like your career, your identity, the way you even interface with reality, it all depends on your body just performing exactly as you command.
Right. Which we basically all take for granted.
We really do.
Yeah.
And then slowly that instrument begins to betray you. But the betrayal doesn't happen in a private room. It happens on a global stage in front of millions of people.
Yeah, and that forces us to confront something we usually prefer to just ignore, the fragility of the human body. We expect our bodies to silently obey us.
Exactly.
And when that obedience starts to fracture, especially for someone whose entire livelihood is built on like extreme physical intensity, the psychological toll is just immense.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the reality we are stepping into today. Welcome to the deep dive. So this is the third deep dive based on a truly remarkable written Parkinson's series. It's authored by Liat Portal, and that's pronounced Liat, by the way.
Right.
And it's co-authored with Dr. Minna Schmidt. And just a quick note, that's pronounced Minna Schmidt, not Minish.
Okay.
Yeah, so today we're focusing specifically on 2 written installments from their larger work. The first is called Into the Void, Ozzy Osbourne, Sharon Osbourne, and the Parkinson's Timeline Nobody Read Correctly. And the second is Paranoid, Fragile, and Still on Stage, Ozzy Osbourne, Sharon, and the Visibility Parkinson's Needed.
Which is such a fascinating pivot, because if you've been following along with us, you might remember our second deep dive, which was Making the Invisible Parkinson's Family Memory, Michael J. Fox, and Ozzy Osbourne. And in that one, we really focused on Michael J. Fox.
Right, the Fox Foundation and all that.
Exactly. We explored how Fox's public visibility was channeled into creating this massive systemic research infrastructure. I mean, he essentially turned his own diagnosis into a data gathering engine.
Yeah, a massive funding mechanism.
Wow.
But the sources we have today from Liat Portal and Dr. Schmidt, they pivot to a completely different type of visibility.
Yeah, they do.
With Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne, we aren't looking at the creation of a clinical foundation. We're looking at cultural visibility and caregiver visibility.
It's a much more raw look.
Totally. It's the unfiltered experience of a public body fundamentally changing over time, right in front of an audience that, frankly, didn't really know how to interpret what they were seeing.
Well, because we have this cultural habit of freezing celebrities in time, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, we want our rock stars to remain perpetually in their 20s, just screaming into a microphone with boundless energy. But Ozzy and Sharon dismantled that illusion.
They really did.
They forced the public to watch the clock, to literally watch the aging process complicated by a serious neurological disease. But, to understand how Ozzy shifted the cultural visibility of Parkinson's, we have to first establish what his body actually meant to his art.
Right, so let's wind the clock all the way back to 1968. Ozzy is a founding member of Black Sabbath, effectively birthing heavy metal. And the source material draws this brilliant contrast here.
The contrast with the music of the time.
Yeah. Like the 1960s were largely defined by this upbeat, optimistic, melodic rock. And then Black Sabbath arrives. And their sound was heavier, darker, slower. It was intensely physical music.
And it demanded a physical output. Like, for Ozzy, performing was never just about standing stationary at a microphone stand.
No, not at all.
The stage layer was the actual work. His voice, his breath control, his timing, his relentless stamina, the way he commanded the physical space, all of that was his instrument.
So when Parkinson's enters his system, it isn't just an illness. I mean, it's a direct assault on the specific instrument he uses to communicate with the entire world.
But that assault wasn't obvious at first, was it?
No, it really wasn't. Liat Portal actually calls this the timeline nobody read correctly. And I want to dig into that because reading Ozzy's timeline seems like it was virtually impossible for anyone.
Yeah, diagnostic muddy waters is probably the best way to describe it. When we think of Parkinson's, the cultural shorthand is usually, a sudden, isolated, resting tremor.
Like a shaky hand.
Exactly. But Ozzy's early neurological signs were much more diffuse. He was experiencing subtle balance issues and a general slowing of movement, which is what neurologists call bradykinesia.
Right. And he was experiencing those things alongside a lifetime of extreme physical trauma. I mean, we are talking about a man who survived decades of severe substance abuse, wild living, and just massive physical injuries.
Yeah, didn't he have a really bad accident?
Yeah, he had a near-fatal ATV accident that required major surgeries.
Yeah.
So, put yourself in the shoes of a medical professional or even his family trying to evaluate his movements 10 or 15 years ago.
It'd be so hard to tell what was what.
Exactly. When a man with that specific history starts moving a little slower or his balance seems slightly off, the immediate logical assumption is just that his past is finally catching up with him.
I mean, it makes perfect sense.
It makes me think of trying to tune an old analog radio.
Hmm.
You're looking for one specific station, the Parkinson signal, but the dial is just blasting overwhelming static.
That's a great way to put it.
The true signal was hiding behind the deafening static of the ATV crash, the surgeries, the orthopedic damage, and honestly, just the general aging process.
That static analogy captures the diagnostic reality perfectly. The noise was just so loud that it absorbed the early subtle signals of the neurological disease.
Yeah.
So by the time Ozzy and Sharon finally disclosed his diagnosis on Good Morning America in 2020, the public reacted with total shock. But Leah Portal makes a crucial observation here, and that is that Ozzy wasn't early to the disease when he announced it.
Right. He was already deep into it.
Yeah.
The static had finally cleared enough for the medical community to isolate the signal, but he had been living with that changing instrument for years.
And yet, despite the failing instrument, he refused to disappear. He didn't just retreat into privacy like a lot of people might.
No, he really didn't.
He had been planning a final Black Sabbath reunion concert, and rather than quietly canceling it, he pushed through. And furthermore, he donated all the profits from that final show to Parkinson's causes.
Wow. That feels like a massive pivot. He turned the conclusion of his heavy metal performance into the initiation of an entirely different kind of performance.
Yeah.
One of, radical vulnerability.
Vulnerability is exactly the key word there. But the static of Ozzy's physical decline wasn't just happening to a rock star in isolation. It was happening inside a home. It was happening to a family.
Yeah, that's such an important point.
And to fully grasp the scale of the visibility they created, we have to look really closely at the person who is actually standing there trying to tune that radio dial through all that noise.
Which brings us to Sharon Osbourne. And the written series emphasizes her role so heavily, and for really good reason. Because Parkinson's is never just an isolated experience. It radiates out to everyone around you.
Absolutely. And Sharon was far more than just a supportive spouse standing in the wings. She was the architect of Ozzy's life and career.
She really was.
She was the manager, the mother, the partner, the nurse, and the protector. She was running a massive global enterprise while simultaneously processing her own fear, exhaustion, and honestly anticipatory grief.
Leah Portal actually uses a phrase in the series that stopped me in my tracks. She says caregivers are essentially the first researchers.
I love that. It is a profound reframing of the caregiver role, because we typically think of researchers as, people in white coats in a lab somewhere.
Right, looking through microscopes.
Exactly. But caregivers are the first true observers. They notice the slight change in a sleep pattern. They notice the hesitation in a step months before a doctor ever sees it in a brief, 15-minute clinical visit.
Yeah, they see the day-to-day data.
They interpret those signs, they translate the patient's lived experience into data for the medical system, and they protect the patient while doing it all.
So we actually have two parallel tracks of visibility happening simultaneously here. I mean, Ozzy made the disease visible by putting his changing physical body on a global stage. But Sharon made the disease visible by showing the world the life around the body.
Yeah, she mapped the social and domestic terrain of Parkinson's. Because clinical trials are incredible for mapping biological markers, sure, but they cannot map the sheer grit required to manage a household under the shadow of a degenerative disease.
They really don't.
They don't capture the learning curve, the logistical nightmares of medications, or just the emotional weight. Sharon showed the world what it actually takes to keep pushing forward.
I have to wonder about the ripple effect of that. Because when a household name like the Osbournes, people who are known for their toughness, their, push through the pain, rock and roll philosophy, when they speak out, it has to reach a completely different demographic than a standard medical awareness campaign.
Oh, without a doubt. It reaches people who would probably never read a medical journal or follow a research foundation's newsletter. By being open, Ozzy and Sharon provided cultural permission.
Cultural permission?
Yeah, like fans sitting at home watching this tough survivor show vulnerability, suddenly they had the vocabulary to recognize those same subtle, diffuse symptoms in their own living rooms.
Oh, I see.
It sparks those kitchen table conversations that eventually lead to doctor's appointments, which then eventually lead to participation in clinical trials.
Right, so it bridges the gap between the audience and the science. And speaking of the science, there is a moment from that heartbreaking Good Morning America interview that Leah Portal highlights, And it completely shifts the direction of this story.
Oh, I know the exact moment you're talking about.
Yeah, Sharon talked about how desperate she was for Ozzy to keep performing, to get back on stage, because she said the stage, quote, gave him life.
It sounds incredibly poetic, doesn't it? Like the artist sustained by the love of the crowd. But the sources reveal that Sharon's statement wasn't just a metaphor. It was actually a highly accurate description of the biological reality of Parkinson's disease.
And this is where we bring in Dr. Minna Schmidt's layer of the research. And I want to navigate this carefully because the mechanics are just mind-blowing.
They really are.
So Dr. Schmidt's work at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging focuses on how physical exertion impacts Parkinson's at a cellular level.
Right. And to understand why the stage literally gave him life, we have to explore the gut-brain connection. So the Buck Institute looks at aging as the primary risk factor for chronic diseases, trying to understand these systems holistically rather than just in isolation.
Okay.
And in Parkinson's, a massive piece of the puzzle is the gut-brain axis, which is essentially managed by the vagus nerve.
Okay, let me make sure I have this straight. The vagus nerve is like an information superhighway running from our gastrointestinal tract, so our gut, all the way up to our brain.
That's right. It regulates our immune system, our stress responses, and importantly, our rest and digest parasympathetic state. And its function is heavily influenced by our microbiome.
Which is the bacteria in our gut, right?
Exactly, the massive community of bacteria living in our gut. A healthy microbiome produces chemicals that keep the vagus nerve functioning optimally.
But in the context of Parkinson's, this highway becomes a problem. The sources mention the brake hypothesis. I actually struggled with this a bit when reading it. Is the theory that the disease actually starts down in the gut.
Yes, the brake hypothesis suggests exactly that. It proposes that Parkinson's pathology might actually begin in the enteric nervous system, the gut, and use the vagus nerve as a literal physical pathway to travel up into the brain.
Okay, wait. Travel how? What is actually traveling up this nerve?
Good question. This is where we look at a specific protein called alpha-synuclein. So in a healthy body, proteins fold into specific shapes to do their jobs. But in Parkinson's, alpha-synuclein misfolds.
Okay.
It becomes sticky and it starts clumping together.
So if the vagus nerve is the highway, these misfolded sticky proteins are basically creating a massive microscopic traffic jam that slowly moves toward the brain.
Exactly. A traffic jam that damages the nervous system as it goes. Researchers like Dr. Schmidt are desperately trying to figure out how to clear that traffic jam, or, at least slow it down. And this brings us right back to Ozzy Osbourne jumping around on a stage for 2 hours.
Right. So how does belting out heavy metal clear a protein traffic jam in the gut?
It comes down to the mechanics of high-intensity exercise and blood flow. When you engage in rigorous, exhausting physical exertion, your body triggers the sympathetic nervous system. That's the classic fight-or-flight response.
Right, so your heart rate spikes, your breathing gets shallow, and your body pumps all available blood to the muscles, the heart, and the lungs so you can literally move.
Exactly. But because your body has a finite amount of blood, it has to borrow it from somewhere else. So during intense exercise, it severely reduces blood flow to the gastrointestinal tract. The gut is basically put on pause.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what happens when the concert ends? Like the exercise stops, the heart rate drops.
Then the parasympathetic nervous system, which is driven by the vagus nerve, roars back to life. This is the rest and digest state.
Yeah.
Blood rushes back to the gut.
Okay.
But it isn't just about digestion. This switching back and forth from the extreme stress of fight or flight to the extreme recovery of rest and digest forces the vagus nerve to work incredibly hard.
It's essentially strength training for the nervous system.
It really is. And here's the critical part. That deep rest and digest recovery phase actually triggers cellular cleanup processes. It's a mechanism called autophagy.
Autophagy. Wait, so the cells are eating their own waste?
Yes. Think of it like a fleet of nighttime street sweepers on that highway.
Oh, I like that.
Right. The intense exercise creates the necessary physiological environment for the body to send out the street sweepers to clear away cellular debris, reduce inflammation, and potentially slow down the aggregation of those sticky alpha-synuclein proteins.
Wow. I just need to take a step back and look at the sheer scale of what you're saying. For decades, Ozzy Osbourne's entire brand was pushing his body to the absolute limit for the entertainment of millions.
Yeah.
He was exhausting himself every single night on tour. And what the science is now telling us is that this brutal physical exertion was triggering his fight-or-flight response, which then forced his vagus nerve to deploy those cellular street sweepers during his recovery.
It is entirely possible that the act of performing was a massive physiological intervention for him. High-intensity exercise, whether it's boxing, dancing, or commanding a stadium stage, is currently recognized as one of the most potent therapeutic tools we have to slow the progression of Parkinson's.
Especially in its earlier stages, right?
Exactly.
He was unknowingly self-medicating through heavy metal?
Yeah.
That is wild. The stage wasn't just his artistic instrument. It was literally a biological lifeline.
Yeah, so Sharon wasn't just being poetic. She was observing a medical reality before the medical community even had the data to back it up. The stage really was giving him life.
It connects everything perfectly. I mean, Ozzy's cultural visibility wasn't just about showing the world what the disease looks like. By refusing to step down, by continuing to push his body to its absolute limits on that stage, he was publicly demonstrating the very mechanism of exertion that researchers at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging are trying to harness and understand at a cellular level.
It's incredible.
But, the reality is nobody can stay on stage forever. Eventually the lights go down, the crowd goes home, and the exertion takes its toll. And that's where Sharon's visibility becomes just as vital as Ozzy's.
Because she is the one managing the aftermath, the extreme fatigue, the complicated medication schedules, the days when the instrument simply refuses to work.
Yeah.
Sharon showed us that the medical reality of Parkinson's doesn't end when the doctor's appointment is over or when the concert finishes. It is a continuous, relentless domestic reality.
Leatt Portal and Dr. Minna Schmidt have built such an incredible bridge here. They've taken the glitz and the chaos of heavy metal royalty, stripped away the celebrity illusion, and presented us with a profound case study.
They really have.
They've shown us the biological power of movement, the insidious nature of the disease's timeline, and the absolute necessity of the caregiver.
It emphasizes that visibility is never just about awareness for awareness's sake. True visibility actually alters the cultural landscape.
Absolutely.
It gives patients permission to seek help, it gives caregivers permission to voice their exhaustion, and it ultimately creates the social environment where scientific research can actually thrive and reach the people it needs to save.
It is a phenomenal synthesis of culture and science. And for you listening, we want to remind you that this deep dive really only scratches the surface of the source material. The written Parkinson series by Leatt Portal and Dr. Minna Schmidt is incredibly expansive. It actually continues across a total of 8 episodes.
Yeah, the material we explored today focused specifically on the Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne sections. We looked at caregiver dynamics, the timeline of public decline, the concept of stage visibility, and the cellular science of exercise.
Right.
But their broader series delves into many more facets of how society understands, misreads, and researches this incredibly complex disease.
It's a compelling reminder of how much goes on beneath the surface of the things we think we understand. We've explored how an instrument heavily relied upon can slowly betray its master, and how the true timeline of that betrayal can be completely obscured by the static of a complicated life.
And we've also seen how it takes a dedicated witness, a relentless caregiver turning the dial to finally cut through that static, helping the medical world and the public read the timeline for what it really is.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. If a heavy metal icon and his fiercely dedicated manager wife can fundamentally change the way society recognizes and investigates a neurological disease, well, it makes you wonder, what other invisible struggles, what other cellular battles are currently playing out right in front of us on the world's biggest stages, just waiting for us to finally learn how to tune the dial and read the timeline?
It certainly changes the lens through which you view public performance and perhaps the quiet struggles of the people in your own life.
Until next time, keep looking past the static.